I keep my father's folded flag in a cedar frame above the porch bench. Most nights it just sits there, catching the light from the lake. But that night it glowed red, then blue, like the old man was getting pulled over by time itself. I had my chipped mug in one hand and the other around my elbows, because the mountain air still bites before sunrise. 2 cruisers eased down the unpaved lane toward the cabin my uncle left me, their tires whispering over the pine needles. I could taste the ash of last night's fire and hear the damp logs pop in the hearth behind me. A woman I didn't know marched a few paces behind the officers like she owned the trail. Beige blazer, the posture of someone who leads meetings that should have been emails. She pointed right at my porch and, without any neighborly hello, said, "That's him. That's the man." I set my mug on the rail where my father once taught me to set a level. "Morning, officers," I said, slow and steady. "Coffee?" The older cop's eyes took in the cabin, the truck with county plates, the wooden plaque with my uncle's last name carved deep into it. "Sir, we got a call about a possible break-in." "I live here," the woman cut in. I lead here. "I'm the board president for Lakeview Ridge. This place has been empty for months. He's occupying without authorization." I swallowed a sigh and kept my tone warm. "Name's David Mason. My uncle left me this cabin. I got in last night, made a small fire, slept with the windows cracked so I could hear the shallows move. That's all." "ID, please," the older officer said. I handed him my license. He glanced at it, then at the second card tucked behind it. His brows climbed a notch. The younger officer swept a beam along the porch steps. He's probably looking for broken locks that didn't exist. The woman's voice came tight and bright. "This community requires approval for occupancy. Transfers go through us. There are fees, an orientation, and a background review." I nodded like I was hearing the weather. "I respect procedures. I also respect a deed. I've got mine." The older cop passed the license back. "Ma'am, let's take a breath." She folded her arms so sharply I could hear the fabric. "I am protecting our standards." Inside, the kettle began to sing. I kept my eyes on hers. "Ma'am, you're welcome to a cup. We can talk like people who live around a shared lake." Her jaw worked. "I already called 911. Understood." I tipped my head toward the officers. "Let me get the paperwork." I stepped inside, past the wall of framed snapshots my uncle never hung level. The place still smelled like pipe tobacco and rain. I grabbed the folder from the mantel, deed copy, tax receipts, a letter from the estate attorney with dates typed as neat as fence pickets. My father's flag watched me cross back to the door. When I returned, the younger officer was asking the woman for her name. "Karen," he repeated. She corrected him with a clipped breath and a different first name. But the look on his face didn't change. I set the folder on the porch rail and opened it. "All in order," the older officer scanned, then nodded. His radio crackled, a frog crawling through static. "Looks solid," he told his partner. The woman bristled. "Solid isn't compliant. We need applications, fees, a board orientation, and courtesy," I added gently. "We all need that." She took one small step toward me, her finger landing on the deed like a gavel. "You can't just show up and move in, ma'am," the older officer said. "Calm as a lake at 6 a.m. Trespass means you're somewhere without a right to be. Owners aren't trespassers." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked past me, maybe hoping the walls would confess a crime the paper didn't. I breathed slow and let the porch do what porches do, turn storms into conversations. "No one's looking to fight," I said. "If the board needs information, you can ask for it. What you can't do is turn police lights into your first hello." A flock of geese trimmed the sky, low and loud. Down the lane, a neighbor in a ball cap paused with his dog, half pretending to check a leash while he watched the show. The younger officer took notes. The older one handed me my papers. "Mr. Mason, thanks for your patience." I nodded. "Of course." Then I looked at the woman, trying hard to keep my voice from carrying old irritations. People in pressed blazers love a rule book when it feels like a mirror. Ma'am, you can call a special meeting. You can send a letter. But calling a burglary on a homeowner at dawn? I shook my head. That's over the line. Her jaw flexed again. You think you know the lines? I do, I said, because I do. I work with them every day. The first time, she studied the second card I had handed the officer. The older cop's eyes drifted to her, waiting to see if she'd put it together. She didn't. Pride is a funny kind of blindfold. I lifted my mug and let the steam find my nose. Officers, you need anything else? Not from us, the older cop said. Then to the woman, ma'am, we'll document the call. Next time, let's make sure the situation is criminal before we roll units out here. Her cheeks flushed. This community has standards, she said again, like she hoped repetition would turn into fact. Same, I replied. So did the man who taught me to fold that flag. He also taught me not to wake neighbors with sirens when a knock would do. For a few seconds, all you could hear was flag cloth whispering in the breeze and a blue jay practicing insults under the eaves. The officer started for the steps. The woman stayed rooted, eyes on me like I'd rearranged her furniture. You're not. Staff, she said finally. You're not on our list. No, I said. But I have my own list. She frowned. Which is? I nodded toward the cedar fence my uncle set post by post back when patience was cheaper. People who mistake power for permission. Her stare lingered one more beat. Then she spun on a heel so sharp it could have cut leather and followed the officers to the yard. At the bottom step, the older cop glanced back and touched 2 fingers to his cap. The way men do when they mean respect. The cruisers turned, and their lights washed the porch one more time. Red, then blue, then night again. I blew across my coffee and took a sip. It tasted like smoke and stubbornness. I stood there until the lights were gone, listening to the small sounds a cabin makes when it decides to be safe again. Behind me, the kettle went quiet. I carried the deed back to the mantel and slid it under the flag frame, not because the paper needed protection, but because I felt like I'd put a promise in the right place. I looked out across the cove at 3 roofs framed by pines, thinking about neighbors I hadn't met yet, thinking about meetings I hadn't asked for. The morning was brightening, and so was something inside me I hadn't felt since my father's. Last good summer, the calm you get when you know where the lines are and you're standing on the right side of them. The phone on the counter buzzed a calendar ping, reminding me to call the estate attorney about a gate key. I let it ring. The first conversation of the day had already been enough. I set the mug down, picked up a pad, and began to write. Not a letter. Not yet, just a list. Dates, statutes, deadlines. The quiet work that turns sirens into paperwork and paperwork into boundaries. Out on the water, a fish popped and disappeared. I smiled. Some things break the surface and sink right back down. Others keep rippling. Either way, I plan to be here to watch. I spent the next afternoon walking the line where the cabin's lot gives up to the community space, counting old survey stakes like rosary beads. My uncle had driven the corner markers himself, stubborn as a mule, and I could still see the faint blaze he'd carved into a white oak at the back edge. He believed in boundaries the way some men believe in scripture. Stand inside them and you're under your own roof. Step outside and you ask first. By midday, I'd stacked brush in a neat pile. I'd swept the porch and cleaned the rust off the old latch that keeps the back gate honest. Then I did what I get paid to do. I opened a notebook, wrote down last night's incident number from the officer's card, and started a basic chronology. Times, names, words, said and not said. I've learned that memory is a slippery fish. You have to net it while it's near the surface. The phone rang. It was my mother, voice soft as a quilt. She wanted to know if the cabin still smelled like her brother's pipe tobacco. I told her it did. She told me to eat something green. We kept each other's promises that way. When I hung up, a shadow crossed the path. Ball-cap guy from down the lane, medium build, lab mix tugging him along. He stopped at the fence, like he wasn't sure if hellos cost extra. "Tom," he said finally, touching his chest. "I'm 2 cabins over, David." I hitched a thumb toward the lake. Beautiful morning. He exhaled like a man who's held a story too long. Heard the sirens. "Sorry you met our president that way." He gave president a shape like a lemon seed. "She's big on forms. Small on folks." I picked up the vibe. He looked at my notebook. "You in law?" "In lines," I said. "I'm a state investigator for common interest housing compliance. Not a cop. Not a lawyer. I just keep communities from forgetting who owns what and why it matters." He tried not to grin. "So last night she threw a fastball to the one guy in the county who can hit it. Something like that." Rubbed his jaw. "She once ticketed me for staining my deck a shade called Walnut Trail instead of pine bark. I brought the can and chart. She wrote me again for talking back." Shrugged. "We pay dues for landscaping and a decent dock. We didn't sign up to be told how brown is." Over his shoulder, the board president herself materialized on the lane, phone in hand, heels somehow working on gravel. She approached like a weather front, bright, loud, definitely coming. "Mr. Mason," she called, each syllable an affidavit. "We need to set your orientation." "Morning," I said. "Have you got a minute?" Her eyes narrowed at the word minute, like it was a trap. If this is about last night, the board is moving on. I'm not. I kept my stance relaxed, palms open, the way I'd learned escalation years ago with a friend who taught school. "I'm on the clock today." I lifted the second card she hadn't bothered to read. Her gaze dropped to the seal. It's a modest graphic, crossed keys, a house silhouette, the word compliance in a ring. Nothing dramatic. But people who build little empires tend to notice when a bigger courthouse is on the hill. "What is this?" she asked, though the letters were plain. "It's my job." I didn't raise my voice. When HOAs drift from state law, my office is where the mail ends up. Elections, notices, fines, records. We don't run your community. We make sure your bylaws don't run your people. Tom made a small noise he probably thought was silent. Her jaw hardened. "You can't use your position for personal benefit." "I'm a homeowner who was woken by a false criminal accusation. I'll do what any homeowner can do, file a complaint. If the matter touches state statutes, I'll assign an investigator who isn't me." She glanced past me at the flag. I didn't move. "What do you want?" she asked at last. "Healthier habits," I said. "No more 911 for paperwork. Proper notices. Proper elections. Fines only where the bylaws actually grant them and where the law allows. And an apology to the officers whose time you wasted last night." Her cheeks flushed. "I was safeguarding standards. You were safeguarding control." We let the silence sit there. The lake lapped. The dog sneezed. Somewhere up the ridge, a chainsaw started and stopped. She tucked the phone into her blazer. "Put it in writing." "I already did." I held up the notebook. "Timelines don't wait for permission." She pivoted and left with the stiff gait of someone inventing reasons on the way. Tom exhaled. "You speak porch like my granddad? Man taught me with a fence post in a square." I tapped the cedar rail. "Everything is lines." That afternoon, I drove into town to the county clerk's office. The woman behind the plexiglass window recognized my badge and handed over copies of the association's latest filings. I read them in the hallway, leaning against a bulletin board covered in lost dog notices and church potluck flyers. Meetings without quorum? Late disclosures. Fines assessed without proper hearing. I'd seen worse, but I'd also seen better from high school student councils. On the way back, I stopped at the diner by the highway where they still write orders on green paper. I ate a plate of eggs and listened to 2 older men argue about whether the new bait shop deserved a mural. The argument was good-natured, which is another word for civilized. No one called the cops. When I returned to the cabin, the lake had slid into that afternoon hush where the water turns into a mirror. I sat on the steps with the file, added dates, underlined statutes, mapped remedies. You can't force respect, but you can protect it. Near dusk, a soft knock at the gate. A woman in a windbreaker stood there, hands in her pockets, eyes worried. "I'm June," she said. "I'm on the board too." She glanced down the lane to make sure the path was empty. Not all of us are happy with how she runs things. "Come on up." I poured her tea because not everyone takes coffee after 5. She told me about fines for leaving a canoe upside down on the rack. It's about a neighbor who got a letter because his granddaughter drew chalk flowers on his driveway. "We joined for dock upkeep and to keep the gravel graded," she said. "We didn't join to feel like kids again. Will you speak up?" She hesitated, then nodded. "If it's fair, we'll be," I said. "That's the only way it works." We watched the sky make a painting no board could regulate. When June left, she carried a copy of the state notice form with the blanks highlighted. "Fill it if you need it," I told her. Sometimes the mere existence of a form changes behavior. After dark, I built a small fire and set my father's flag where the light could find it. I drank from the old mug and felt the thin chip near the rim, the way you can feel your own age in the morning. I remembered him checking my math with a carpenter's pencil. Measure twice. Cut once. Don't cut people if you can help it. The next morning, my complaint went in. Not vindictive, just precise. Narrative. Exhibits. A request that any investigation be handled by a colleague by noon. My phone buzzed with a forwarded message. The board president had called a special compliance session for the weekend. Agenda, orientation practices, records, law enforcement protocol. The last phrase made me breathe out through my nose. Protocol is what people say when they mean how to not get caught next time. But if you get the right people in the right room, protocol can become culture. I walked to the end of the dock and let the boards thrum under my boots. The water was a gray coin. This place wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. It needed to stay a place where people nodded before they spoke and asked before they fined. That's all. As I turned back up the path, I saw the board president at the lane with 2 others talking low. She pointed at my cabin, then at a stack of folders she held tight enough to wrinkle them. The men nodded like men do when they don't want to be the next topic. I hung my jacket on the porch hook, ran a hand over the cedar rail my uncle had sanded smooth, and decided something without saying it out loud. I would show up. I would speak in plain sentences. I would not raise my voice. If that didn't work, I'd let the law do what it was written to do. I looked at the flag. "All right, Dad," I said to the folded triangle, a ritual that still felt like a conversation. "We'll try it the neighbor way first," the lake breathed. The pines answered. The porch held steady under my weight. Saturday evening, the clubhouse smelled like folding chairs and old coffee. The board had set up a long table at the front, 3 microphones pointed at 3 chins. A hand-lettered sign at the door said, "Special session, members only." Someone had tried to add "Be kind" on a sticky note. It had fallen crooked. Neighbors filled the rows in 1s and 2s. Couples and cousins, people who shared docks and recipes and snow shovels in February. Tom sat near the aisle. June gave me a quick nod. The board president blazer pressed 2. Battle tapped the mic and cleared her throat with a noise that said, "I was right all along." "We are here," she began, "to reaffirm standards. Can tell a lot about a meeting by the first verb." Reaffirm meant we already decided. I kept my eyes level and my breath slow. She ran through an agenda that sounded like a polite version of last week's mistake. Orientation procedures, documentation protocols, law enforcement contact guidelines. Every point came with a justification that folded back on itself like a paper crane. When she finished, she scanned the room like a teacher waiting for obedient silence. I raised my hand. "The chair recognizes." "Mr. Mason," she said. Like the words cost her. I stood just enough so people in back could see me and not enough to seem like I was looming. Evening. David Mason, owner on Birch Cove. I'll keep this simple. I set my old mug on the floor by my boot. The room watched the mug the way people watch a gavel. Thursday before dawn, 2 patrol cars came to my porch because the board president reported a burglary. There was no burglary. There was a deed and a tax receipt and a man drinking coffee. I don't mind neighbors checking on neighbors. I mind 911 being used as an icebreaker. A murmur rolled the back row and let it pass. This isn't about personalities, I continued. It's about practices. Our bylaws don't trump state law. State law says fines need notice and a hearing. Elections need quorum and transparency, and board authority isn't a grab bag. My office doesn't run your board. We watch the guardrails. President leaned toward the mic. Is this a threat? It's a reminder. I lifted a thin folder. I filed a complaint as a homeowner because I was falsely accused of a crime. I asked that any state review be handled by colleagues so there's no conflict. What I want from this room is something simpler than an audit, a course correction. A woman 3 rows back stood up without permission. My grandson drew a chalk sun on our driveway, she said. We got a letter calling it defacement, he cried. He's 4. Ah! Another voice. I was told my canoe color disrupted cohesion. It's a canoe. Last fall, a man in boots added, I got fined for trimming the path by the dock after the storm. We were tripping over branches. I thought I was helping. Stories spill once a room feels safe. The president tried to gavel the air with her palm. If we allow chaos, order isn't control, I said. Not louder, but steadier. Order is agreement. June raised her hand and didn't wait to be called. I move we adopt a moratorium on discretionary fines until procedures are reviewed by council and aligned with state code. Tom shot his hand up. Second. The president blinked. This is not how it is, June said. It's a duly noticed meeting. We have quorum. Members can move motions from the floor. The secretary, who had been chewing a pen cap, stopped chewing. She's right. The president tried a different angle. This community expects standards. We expect neighbors, someone said softly, and the soft traveled. The vote wasn't close. His hands rose like reeds when wind finally finds a marsh. The moratorium passed. Then a motion for a records review. Then for an election committee chaired by anyone but the president. Each time, the room found its spine a little faster. When it was over, the president's face looked like a map that forgot which road was which. She clutched a clipboard the way some folks clutch a life preserver. This is illegal, she said into a microphone that was no longer listening. I have given my life to this community. So give us back our afternoons, the Choctaw grandmother replied. Security didn't escort anyone out. That's not how we do it here. The president walked herself to the door, Hills measuring the distance between 2 kinds of power after. People gathered in little eddies to talk logistics. Who would call? The attorney? How to contact owners who rented their cabins? Whether meetings could be recorded so grandkids could watch civics in action? I shook hands. I answered what I could and wrote down what I couldn't. I reminded folks that law is a patient animal and urged them to treat each other like porches and docks maintained, shared, not weaponized. On the way out, the older officer from that first morning stood in the doorway. He'd come with his wife to fish the next cove and stuck his head in when he saw cars. He touched 2 fingers to his cap again with a little grin that said, "See, you didn't need us." Back at the cabin, I set the flag where the firelight could catch it and poured one last cup in the chipped mug my father left me. Out on the water, a pair of night birds traded notes like neighbors passing recipes over a fence. I leaned on the rail my uncle had sanded smooth and watched the lake hold the moon like a coin. The next week, my office mailed the association a formal notice. Respond to records requests within the statutory window. Hold elections with proper notice. Cease discretionary fines until hearings procedures were corrected. And implement a written protocol for contacting law enforcement that began with the word hello. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. The former president kept walking her small dog past my drive, eyes forward, cheeks tight. I didn't wave first. but I didn't turn away. Some lessons take a few laps. June emailed to say the election committee had set a date. Tom texted me a photo of his deck with the stain can perched on the rail like a witness. The canoe stayed orange. The chalk sun came back after a light mist. I heard the new board was talking about a picnic instead of a compliance seminar. The dock ladder got fixed, the path got trimmed. No one got fined for helping. One afternoon, I found a folded note under a river stone on my porch. I was wrong, Kay. No excuses. No paragraphs. I left it under the stone and said a quiet thanks to the part of her that had let go. I'm not a hero. I'm a homeowner who knows where the lines go and why we draw them. There's nothing fancy about dignity. It looks like speaking with your inside voice when the room gets loud. It looks like a board remembering that the words association and neighbor are supposed to mean the same thing. I touched the corner of the flag and felt the tight triangle give back a little. A home is a promise you keep in public. The old man used to say that when he chalked a line to cut. Wasn't really talking about lumber, so I'd sit here most nights, boots on the porch, steam from my mug curling like the first sentence of a story I already know the end of. The cedar posts hold, the lake breathes. The cabin remembers who it belongs to. And our little road, with its potholes and pine cones and rumor mill, feels like the kind of place where you can live without looking over your shoulder. Justice, it turns out, doesn't shout. It stands. It listens. It gets the lights turned off at a reasonable hour, and it goes home and sleeps like a porch after rain. If you think some fights are worth having, the quiet ones where you fix what's crooked without breaking what's whole, well, you know where to find me. The coffee's on, the flag's steady, the door's open.